So I had this kick and two bass lines that I was trying to fit together. Now, this kick drum wasn't the kind of usual kick drum that I would use because it had a lot of lower mids to it, but I really loved the tone of it. Problem is, when I added too much saturation, it was making it sound muddy. So I ended up using this really cool technique which saved the kick drum, which I'm going to share with you today. Have a listen to how it sounds. Now I'm going to take it out. Bring it back in. So you can hear how it's really just giving that kick drum a lot of attack without heavily changing the tone of the kick drum. Now, what is it that I'm doing here? Well, first and foremost, I'm using a Transient Shaper. Now, Transient Shaper, for me, is the first thing that comes to mind when I think about adding punch. But Transient Shapers have a huge problem. They literally add a ton of volume to that initial transient, which ends up meaning that there's a massive volume boost, well, in the peak level when you look at the meters. Have a look at how this looks on the meters when I bypass the Transient Shaper versus when I bring it in. So as you can see, there's a massive volume boost. It's actually going into the red. However, when I listen to the kick drum, that's the kind of punch that I want to get out of it. So what is it? What is the solution? How can I retain that punch without having the massive volume boost? Well, very simply, I just take a saturator or a clipper and I place it after the Transient Shaper. Because what actually ends up happening is you're boosting the transient going into the clipper or into the saturator, but the saturator is then reducing the peaks again. Now you're thinking, wait, that's counterintuitive. You're boosting the peaks going into a saturator, but then the saturator is then reducing the peaks. Well, what actually ends up happening is really interesting. Because you boost the transient going into the saturator then becomes most sensitive towards that transient. So when it's saturating, it's actually adding the saturation to the transient, whereas the body of the sound isn't being affected by the saturation as much. Basically, you can get a punchier kick drum without affecting the tonality of that kick drum too much. Pay attention to this. So have a listen to how it sounds without Decapitator, and then I'm going to bring it in. So do you notice how when you engage the Decapitator, the sound didn't have a drastic difference, like it didn't change drastically, but you gained a little extra saturation and the sound popped out a little bit more. But when you look at the meters, what you did gain is at least 6 to 7 dB of headroom without the sound sounding overly distorted. So for me, whenever I'm using a Transient Shaper, I love to do the Transient Shaper going into a clipper or into a saturator for this very reason. Now, if there's a cool way that you know to add punch to drums, then do us a favor, let us know in the comments down below. This way, anyone who comes on this video will not only see my technique, but they'll also be able to see all of your techniques as well. And if you like this kind of content, you know what to do, like and subscribe. Other than that, I look forward to seeing you all next time.